Hello, and welcome to Top Voice Tuesday on September 9th. I'm excited to be here with Jeff Frick, fellow Top Voice, to talk about the realities of AI in big companies. We've talked about AI on this show quite a bit, and this conversation is going to be about how companies are responding. We hear a lot of news in the media, we hear a lot of things online in social media. We're going to try to separate fact from fiction. Jeff, I'm going to give you a chance to tell your story in just a moment. But for those of you that are joining us live, please do leave a comment, leave a question. We like to get to those. And those of you who are listening on the podcast will have show notes and places to get in touch with Jeff when we're done wrapping up this conversation. So, Jeff, welcome to the show. And as is customary, tell us who you are, what you do, and how did you get to the top of the Top Voice Mountain?
Well, Michael, first off, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here. The Top Voice journey is interesting. You know, I used to be a bag carrying sales guy. I used to sell Mitsubishi TVs back in the day. And in those days, you know, your Rolodex and your business cards were like gold. You treasured them. And so when LinkedIn launched in like 2003 or 2004, I think it's 2004 or whatever, I was amazed that you could actually go to an online database to find your potential customers, see their name, where they live, their address, and if you could connect with them, even their email. And I was completely blown away and jumped into LinkedIn with both feet, not so much on publishing, but really just building a network, thinking that down the road this could be of some benefit, and really thinking of kind of 6 degrees of separation, which is kind of the mantra of LinkedIn, right? Is even if I want to get to Michael Lopez, maybe I know somebody else and I can get through here, and really started playing with it. I didn't publish much on the platform until probably I looked it up, some early articles I did like 2015, 2016, just started to kind of get my toes wet. At that time I was at the Cube. We were doing a lot of interviews with executives, and most of our clips and most of our kind of social media publishing was really around Twitter and X now, and less on LinkedIn. And then I slowly started to add a little bit more to the LinkedIn. I left the Cube in 2020 and went independent, and suddenly now I didn't have my own media platform. And that's really when I jumped in with both feet to say, I'm going to use LinkedIn as my publishing platform. I don't have an independent one. I don't think people are going to come to my stupid website, and I don't expect them to. But now, after 20 years, I built this great audience on LinkedIn. And I started to publish, and that's where I really started to publish more. And then I launched a couple of podcasts. And again, my whole concept on content these days is long form podcasts like this or long form articles. Really, you think of them as almost like ore. It's like, you know, you just scooping up the dirt and putting it in the back of the truck. And then through a process, what you want to get to is the gold. And not only do you want to get to the gold and the gold nuggets, but even shaped in the context for what you want it for. Is it a necklace? Is it earrings? Is it a watch? And so once I started getting my own podcast up and running, then I could start going ahead and clipping and posting really actively on LinkedIn with clips. And so it's funny, I've heard a couple of these episodes getting ready for the people like, I got the email. I didn't believe it. I got the email in 2024. I didn't believe it. I've been on for 20 years. I had 30 some odd thousand followers. I'm like, really? I'm finally a top voice, whatever that means, you know, because in Twitter, they used to have the blue check, and everyone used to try to kind of game the blue check. So that's where was kind of my LinkedIn journey. And so I publish a lot on LinkedIn. If I'm home, I publish most every day, often many times a day. I don't really use scheduling, publish. You know, I'm a big fan of, if you're in the moment, publish. You know, if you feel it, go with it. If you're not feeling with it, don't worry about it. And I just don't trust the technology to schedule stuff with the complexity around my posts. So I've been at it for a while, and it's a nice kind of recognition of trying to bring value to the platform beyond just simply trying to sell stuff and coach.
I love that. And it's a great example of the phrase change happens slowly and then all at once. You've been
Exactly.
at it for 20 years. And, you know, I think a lot of people try to shortcut the algorithm sometimes and try to maybe get rich quick on the platform by chasing things. And I just love your story of it's about mining, harvesting, being consistent, and just getting with sharing and really not expecting anything back. And then all of a sudden someday there it is, and you get this
Right.
recognition. I've heard similar stories from other folks that have been on this podcast.
And chasing the algorithm is just a mistake because the algorithm changes all the time, and you'll see the reaction to your stuff change all the time. So for me, it's a much easier strategy just to be kind of true to what you're trying to do and just be in your own voice and just do it. And one of my basic hypotheses is out of the 6 billion people or 8 billion, whatever the number is now in the world, many of which you connected, hopefully some small sliver will find what you're saying interesting, and you can build a community. But it's really a really small sliver on that big giant number. So just be true to who you are, and then hopefully there's some other people that appreciate that point of view and appreciate that opinion and come into your community.
Yeah, that's such great advice, and we've heard it from other people many times on this. But just to reinforce it, be who you are and share, and the things that will come. I think it was Portia Parker Griffin a couple weeks ago said, "You never know who's watching," and I loved that clip because if you worry about the outcomes, then you're not going to get started. Because here's the truth: the first couple times you start posting, nothing really happens. It's
Right.
pretty quiet. You've got to stay at it for a while. So that's great. That's really great advice. So let's jump into the conversation, Jeff. And I'd love to hear your maybe just some more background on your journey with AI and what you do with companies and how you're kind of talking. How did you get into this space in terms of this being something that you've been focused on recently?
Yeah. So I jumped into the technology space in 97. After I got out of business school, I came back to the Bay Area. We'd already lived here and got a job at Intel. And that was kind of right at the beginning of the internet and, e-commerce and all these things. So I've been involved in these technology waves over and over and over and over and over at Silicon Valley, SaaS and cloud, and the list goes on and on. Probably, I don't know, 2012, I joined a company called theCUBE, and we basically did ESPN Game Day meets tech conference. And that's where I really started getting into interviewing executives about all these changing technology trends. And I was there for 8 years, 10,000 interviews, executive produced. I probably did 2,000 myself. And then when COVID came, that was based on live events. Live events kind of died. It was time to take a break. And I started my own show. And at that time, if you remember, the critical issue was remote work, distributed teams. How do you manage them? And nobody knew because it just happened like a light switch. Right. So that's really what the genesis of Work 20XX was all about, really helping people who had never had distributed teams learn how to work distributed teams. Okay, fast forward now 5 years later, the current pressing issue for employers is how to get your employees to adopt AI into their workflow and their processes. Well, guess what? It turns out it's the exact same management philosophies, practices, and behaviors that made people successful supporting distributed work, that makes people successful getting their teams to adopt AI. And that's supporting risk-taking, it's supporting community learning, it's setting aside time to train people and give them time to learn. It's all the same kind of behaviors. It's how you react to failure and risk taking. It's this whole thing that now has kind of morphed from how do we support distributed teams to how do we drive AI adoption. So the focus of the show has really shifted significantly since then in terms of the people I interview and trying to get insights from people who are having success using AI in their world, and what can we learn from them. So we've learned all kinds of interesting things.
You're speaking my language about practices and behaviors. I was just at a workshop last week talking about behaviors with a company and what does that look like in terms of the kind of shifts that you need to make. So let's talk about those because I think you've drawn a really good parallel to something that we can all relate to, the COVID experience and working from home and diving into video and remote teams. So what's happening now? Maybe what's different? Is there anything different that's happening now with this wave? You've highlighted some of the similarities, but are there things that are maybe unique to this moment in the AI revolution?
So it's a step function of exponential curves, a cold splash of water in our face. I mean, it's crazy the amount of power that we have at our disposal at the end of our telephone. That I think the most underreported piece of the whole thing is that we can talk to. So no longer do you have to be a programmer to get the power of a supercomputer to help you solve problems. That is a huge a difference that wasn't there before at all. I think that's the biggest piece. And then the second piece is, I think, is people have a lot of opportunities to apply the technology in different parts of their own personal workflow. And so really what you've got to encourage is curiosity and exploration, because if you've never used something, a tool in your workflow, then why would you use it unless somehow you try it and you see the benefits? So I think driving that curiosity, driving that experimentation, and really actively looking for places you can apply this is really what's different, because it is an active act to take a minute from your normal process, turn to ChatGPT or whatever your tool is and say, can you take a swag at this? And I think our only limitations are kind of the ways that we think how we can put this thing to use.
Yeah. One of the things I think you're also hitting on is this idea of maybe loss. So, what do you see from people? I have my own anecdotes, but I'm sure you have your own experiences of there's certainly a fear index around AI that it's coming for your job. And
Yeah.
I think the party line is it's not coming for your job, it's augmenting your job. But you hear in the news or different managers from companies, executives saying, "Hey, we're looking to find ways to replace workers where we can." You and I were talking before the show about the job market and maybe what that's starting to look like. So, where is that loss experience happening from the individual worker to maybe what companies are trying to do to figure out how to get the efficiency gains out of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because especially in developed countries, we have this massive demographic trend that's in the negative direction in terms of having enough people to fill the jobs. And if you would have asked me 3 years ago, the trend is very clear. There's just not going to be enough people in the race to automation to just fulfill. And a great place to look at is like the food industry, where everything from the planting of the seeds to the harvesting to the processing to the serving your food at a restaurant, there's just not enough labor throughout that whole thing. So they're desperately trying to get automation and robotics to fill that piece of it up. But now, if you think of typical white collar work, right? What are some of the jobs? Like a huge white collar work used to be like accounting. A huge white collar job used to be an API. You basically take a printed report from one computer and you type it into another. So you're basically a human API. So as the technology takes those jobs away, traditionally when new tech has come, there's been new jobs that have been formed that never existed before that kind of make up the difference, like prompt engineer that didn't exist 4 years ago. But there's a really messy middle and it's a really tough skills transition that for any individual could be really tough. Another classic one is truck drivers, right? There's not enough truck drivers. There's a huge demand for truck drivers, but we all know in the not too distant future, that's going to be taken over by autonomous trucks. So if you're considering a career in the trucking industry, is that something you really want to start today, knowing that in the not too distant future, you might not have an opportunity? So I think it's at a real crux right now because the technology seems to be accelerating past the rate that we're losing people based on the demographic trend. I think it's pretty isolated based on the job, but I think it's really changed. It's really changed the game in the last couple of years.
Yeah. What's the experience difference between how then sort of senior executives and management are thinking about like what are some of the myths and the misconceptions about how executive teams are looking at the technology and thinking about their own business model? You're describing sort of a personalized experience of how I'm working in my daily life. What can I automate and outsource?
Right.
But what are executives really getting right? Or maybe what are they still not sure about? What are some of the myths?
Yeah, I think the biggest myth is kind of the always the consideration of where we are today versus where we're going to be tomorrow. And where we are today is there's still a lot of hallucinations, and you have a really high risk of hallucinations if it's in an area that you're not knowledgeable about. So this is really important. If you're using AI to help you as a thought assistant in an area that you're knowledgeable about, you can both identify hallucinations, but more importantly, you can assess the value. Is it immaterial and it doesn't really matter, or is it material and this is completely wrong? If you are in a topic area, 10 or 15 questions, and then you touch on something you know nothing about, the probability of you recognizing the hallucination drops off the cliff. So I think that's where the biggest myth is kind of where it is today versus where it is tomorrow. That said, tomorrow's going to come a lot faster than we think. And so if you're not getting your hands dirty and getting in the weeds with this and trying to learn it today, you're going to be even further behind tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So I think there's just a little bit of confusion as to the speed of the adoption. And I do think, there was just a huge article that came out. MIT announced 95% failure in AI pilots the other day. And I think part of the problem is because they're thinking of it from a corporate view instead of thinking at it from the individual view. Because I think that's where all the little gains are. All the people I talk to, it's the individuals that get the gain. And then from a corporate point of view, Carrie Sullivan talks about this a lot. One of my guests, if her whole strategy is you get that 8% who love change and adoption. You get them on board. And then there's like this 15% messy middle that you try to get them to come on based on the first 8. The 15% then are a little bit more of the settlers. They'll like write the rules and write the processes, and then hopefully the balance will take on. And her great quote is, people will change behavior to belong. They won't change behavior because you ask them to. So I think it's really thinking about it psychologically, trying to find champions like any other tech project, trying to find early successes like any other tech project. But now you're really almost working, it's more internal than external, getting people excited about taking the risk, because it is a risk. You are kind of helping train the technology to take your job, just as it's happened over and over and over again. So we have to be ready for what's the next job, because if your job was doing square roots, calculators were kind of problematic for you.
That's right. That's right. This isn't the first time this has happened. I want to go back to something you've said. You said two things there that I just think are gold. The first one is, if you're working in an area of expertise that you don't have and you're using AI, the risk of you missing something goes up. And I think it's a great reminder that you can use AI in your own area of expertise. It's not about knowing what you don't know. It's about complementing what you know to move faster through what you know. And I
Right.
think it's really well said in the way that you captured that. The second thing you said just a moment ago about the behavior side of risk taking and moving into training your skills. I have another quote I use from that. What your guest was quoting is called the law of diffusion of innovation, which is it takes about 20% of a population inside of an organization to start to move and bring the rest of the population on. It's a very well-known kind of change practice. I live by the principle that it's easier to act your way into new ways of thinking than think your way into new ways of acting. And what you're hitting at is experimentation is a good thing.
Right.
You just have to try it. And if you're afraid that by trying it, I'm going to lose, here's the thing: you're going to lose anyway. You're going to lose faster, actually, because you won't adapt your skill set over time.
Right. And and people just so struggle with where to get started. I think that's still the biggest issue. So many people surprisingly still have never used Notebook LM. Like, are you kidding? Have you never got like a 5,000 page PDF, or 6 of them that you need to analyze? So I think it's trial. And again, put ChatGPT on your phone, put it on talk mode, and talk to it when you're on your walk. Ask it questions. And it's like any tool, right? The more you use it, the more comfortable you are. And you just have to try to find ways to take that extra step in your workflow to move it over there and see what happens, and find those places where it helps. Right now, too, as Brian Elliott would say, it's a J curve, right? So your productivity goes down because you're actually having to manage the stupid thing. And I argue with ChatGPT when it's not doing what I want it to do. So there is a J curve effect, but ultimately all technologies have J curve, and ultimately it will get you more for less.
This is another key principle in the world of change that you're hitting on that does affect companies. And I'll be interested, again, in your point of view between the individual J curve and the corporate J curve, because we all can manage our own reduction of performance when we're trying something new in life, whatever it may be. And by definition, when I'm trying something new, I'm not very good at it. And at some point, I hit an inflection at the bottom of my curve and I start to move up. And the slope of that line depends on what I'm doing and who I am and all that.
Right.
What stops companies is the downward ROI indicators or performance indicators is when they stop. Oh, this isn't working. Now, if you take AI and individual workers, like, are you seeing a relationship there between, like, how patient are companies being with their workforce as they're moving through this individual and collective J curve? Are they sticking with it? Do they know that they're, because I've seen some companies that are like, we're not using this yet. We don't trust it. And then there's companies that are saying, let's just dive in.
Yeah, well, I think they're all over the map. I think a lot of them are just burying their heads in the sand, right? I think there's still a lot of people that aren't quite sure where this is going and how fast this is going to change things. And the bigger mistake, I think, is for managers that look for an opportunity to save costs versus invest to grow. And it was the same thing we saw with cloud, right? The whole idea with cloud is that you're faster. So don't necessarily use it to save money, but how can you then take those resources that you're not using to manage your own infrastructure to accelerate your innovation cycles and to accelerate your people? And I think it's the same with AI. If you look at it as a way just to save money and chop heads, you're not going to get the full benefit out of it. If you look at it as a way to untether your people from some of the tedious, shitty work that they don't want to do, or is an inhibitor to their productivity, then you grab innovation. Andrew Boyagi, who is a head of development experience at Atlassian, he talks about the developers. They don't use AI to do the actual developing, but there's all these ancillary activities they do around it, like documenting what they did or explaining to people what their strategy was for a non-English speaker that wants a nice, clean ChatGPT generated a summary. So, there's all these things around the core where there's opportunities to apply this technology as well. So I think a lot of leaders are scared, like they were with remote work, and it's all about, are they measuring the right things? Are they measuring outcomes? Are they measuring costs? Do they have surveillance sensors? Are they measuring your mouse movements, or are they measuring your output? I could go on forever on the ridiculousness there.
You're hitting at this mindset shift that I think is maybe a great reminder for everyone in really how you view the world. And it kind of goes back to the question I asked you at the beginning: is this about loss? If I'm staring at this very Buddhist principle that I say a lot, which is what you stare at gets bigger. And so if I'm looking at the absence of opportunity, if I'm looking at loss, well, that's what I'm going to see. But if I'm looking at free time, if I'm looking at thinking time and saying, wow, what could I do with that space that I'm currently not able to? The challenge is the human brain doesn't quite work that way, right? We see the things that are being removed from us as opposed to the doors that are opening. So I think this leads to another great question about the companies that are maybe, is it just a leader or an executive team that has that mindset and they're willing to embrace it? Is there a bigger force at play? Does it come down to just, hey, we've got a leader who has got the right orientation, or we've got one that's scared? Is there something more systemic maybe that's happening where companies are feeling like they can really take the leap?
I think there's two pieces to it. I do think it has to come from the leader, right? Because as we said, by rule, your productivity might go down a little bit in terms of if you're just measuring time, because now we have to send people to these AI classes. Or, another really big important piece of this is the group learning aspect of it, and making sure people are doing it as a team and learning from one another, and helping one another out. So that's going to cost you money and time. So I do think it needs to be a leader who's progressive enough to see that this is worth the investment. But then I think really where the magic happens, just like remote work, is at the team level. And at the team leader and at the small group level, because that's when you're going to make significant changes in the way that those people can output whatever it is that their mission is. So you kind of need both of those, but you definitely need executive to support, to say, we are going to invest money in this and we're going to take the time. Charles Corley, another one of my guests, he works at a company called M. Moser and Associates. It's a big design construction firm out of Singapore, and still independent. And Miss Moser, who runs the thing, bought the full suite of ChatGPT for every employee in the company.
Wow.
Not knowing how they're going to use it or how she's going to get that ROI, but knowing that this is the future and I want my people to be part of the future. And the only way to get them into the future is to give them the tool and encourage them to use it. And of course, Charles is an amazing example of someone who uses it every day. And he also gives some great example how he uses it at work. But, for her to make that investment, for everybody to have the enterprise edition, shows the forward-looking thinking that I think people need to have.
Yeah. Let's talk about the other side of that, though, real quick, because just last week I had Alexander Blanc on the show. He's a cybersecurity and privacy expert. And one of his cautions to the world was most people don't understand the actual technological basis for how AI works. And in
Yep.
many cases, the technology is advancing in ways that the developers don't know how it works in some
Yep.
cases. So can you rush too quickly? And I know that I saw this cartoon the other day. It was sort of funny, kind of tongue in cheek, and it was a bunch of executives, and it says, "What do we want?" And they cheer AI, and they say, and then they say, "When do we want it? Now." And then they go, "What do we want it for?" And it's just like three dots, right? It's just sort of quiet because they didn't
Right.
know. They just know they should be doing it. But
Right.
there's this other side of, what are the risks of jumping too soon? What are the things we don't see? What are the things we don't know? Are there information gaps? Are there privacy concerns? Are there security concerns that these companies are talking about?
Yes, yes, and yes. Um, Security and privacy, we still don't have that figured out at all. We still don't have a nationwide breach notification law. So we have failed miserably as a country in regulating privacy and that whole category, which does not bode well to then you look at what happened with social media, which was just unfettered and a lot of the destruction and problems that that's caused with mental health. And we could go on and on and on. So then you get to AI, which is kind of the next version of that. We are completely inadequate in preparing, I think, right now. For all the law of unintended consequences. That's what's going to happen based on the evidence of what we did with security and privacy, based on the evidence of what we've done with regulation around social media. So I think it's a really legitimate concern. I think if you're a company and an enterprise, I think a lot of them now, have enterprise versions of it. I don't work at a big company, so I don't know for sure, but you want to keep that information in there. We're hearing about ChatGPT queries coming up in Google searches recently. So that is an absolutely valid and serious issue that you know when Fifi Lee, who was a big AI person at Google and then went to the Stanford Human Centered AI Institute, whatever, Stanford High, and she was interviewed by Reid Hoffman about this question. She just said, well, we're just trying to teach the ethics to the people that we have at Stanford the best we can so they make the right decision, which was not a great answer. He asked Mirai, I always forget her last name, who was at OpenAI. She was the CTO. She's not there anymore. He asked her, and her answer was, well, we're just going to go as fast as we can until we hit something that slows us down. And our strategy to answer your concern is we'll just be as open as we can be, which again is not the right answer. So I think there's some real concerns. Absolutely.
Yeah. We're getting close to time. This has gone lightning. We could spend another 2 hours doing this, and maybe we should come back and do the rest. We talked about a lot of things, Jeff. I want to maybe distill it down to just a couple essential pieces of advice that you would give to, you've mentioned individuals, you've mentioned teams, and you've mentioned executives, the ones that run the company. What piece of advice would you give to each of those layers of the business about how they should progress through the next wave of AI evolution?
Really, for the leaders, it's the same thing I would have told them for distributed work. Push control down as far as you can into the organization. Ultimately, hopefully at the team level, but as much kind of autonomy as you can push down and control, push down, because the fact of the matter is everything's moving way too fast on way too many vectors, and no CEO can possibly keep on top of all the things. So the only way I think to have a successful company is to have a bunch of independent people that are making smart decisions independently, moving fast. So push it down. For the managers, I think that really the biggest thing is to convince your boss to invest and look at things like team learning and team exercises and things that are going to build a little community around the process of adopting this, because it's tough. And a lot of people, 80% are not comfortable with change. So, how do you create the structure and the team and the conditions where people are more likely to start to adopt this? And then for the individual, I would just say, just try it, just use it. I mean, use it for just the easiest way to start is where you would usually ask a Google question, ask AI, and then it will always ask you a follow-up. So I think you just have to exercise your curiosity muscle and explore it, so you start to get a feel for what its limitations are, where it can help and not. First time I ever did, I had it write a bio for me, and it was completely wrong. It messed up my schools. So it was like clear as day that it didn't crawl LinkedIn. So but it's only through using it that you start to understand kind of where these limitations are, and it takes away the mystery. It's just a tool. Unfortunately, we still have to check the square root calculations, but really think of it more as a thought partner, a junior colleague is how Charles Cullen likes to talk about it, where you're sharing ideas, not necessarily what's 2 plus 2 and expecting the answer back.
Yeah. That's really great advice. I mean, just to share my own personal experiences on that, I've designed entire workshops for my clients through an interactive process of chatting with ChatGPT. It's my information, they're my methodologies, they're my exercises, but the interaction, it's been late at night, it's 10 o'clock, and I'm having a conversation and getting feedback. Should we try this? Should we do that? And it's incredibly effective, but it's still, to your point, it's still me harvesting those ideas and getting that interaction. And I think you've given people some good advice around change. When I think about what's come up for me are two things, and it's stuff I talk about in my book. Initiate movement, which is you're never ready, you just have to start.
Right.
And embrace stress. This is going to be uncomfortable, and I think you've reminded us that we've all been through something about 5 years ago, which was called the pandemic, and we all figured it out, and we're going to figure this out too. And I just think that's really, really great advice. Jeff, we have a closing tradition on this podcast that I shamelessly stole from another podcast, and so it's actually around this idea of advice. So your bonus question for the week is: what is the most frequent advice you give to young professionals, and why do you give them that advice?
Boy, I don't talk to so many these days anymore here, sequestered in my little podcast. It's mainly be curious and learn to dance. Learn to dance because what you do today is not going to be what you do tomorrow. When all the kids used to work for me, I would say this is not going to be your last job. So I shouldn't think it's going to be. You shouldn't think it's going to be. You got to be prepared to learn and grow and change. And so I think the skills of critical thinking, the skills of relationship building, the skills of being curious and willing to learn, lifelong learner, I think those are the most important things, because it's a very scary and uncertain future that we're headed to. So trying to pick a lane, outside of maybe plumbers probably have a pretty good track for the next several years, but outside of that, it's a lot less clear. So be ready to dance and be ready to learn and stay curious.
I love that. And I think those are truly words to live by. Jeff, this has been great. We've got some great comments in the chat from Jackie and Jose, really resonating with what you're saying. Where can we find you beyond LinkedIn? Where can we learn about your podcast? Let folks know, and anything you'd like to offer up to folks listening.
Sure. So LinkedIn is definitely the main place you can find me. My two podcasts are Work 20XX. It's available wherever you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. And my other podcast is called Turn the Lens, which is a little bit more nebulous, but it's really been spending a lot more time on robotics recently, because one of the things we didn't talk about is how LLMs and these models have changed the world of robotics, which basically connected voice and people talking to things that move robotic arms. And so there's a lot of really crazy, exciting things happening there as well.
Great. We'll put all those links into the show notes and put them on LinkedIn so everyone can find you as well. Jeff, thank you so much for sharing. This has really been fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in to Top Voice Tuesday, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Michael.